Welcome to episode 551 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and I do apologize to everybody for missing the 5 headlines after the Villarreal match, but I was somehow in worse shape than Barcelona was when they were up 3-2 with 6 minutes left to go against Villarreal. At this point, if those who are watching, well, especially I think for those who are listening, I'm currently I showered and I'm doing a podcast, feeling better, but I'm not yet managed to shave and look presentable and feeling in any way okay or sounding okay, better yet. So I'm still on the road to recovery. I appreciate all the good wishes and all the things that people sent to me, as I really did. I woke up on Saturday having been not even in my own bed. I was visiting a friend, and I woke up, thought I was hallucinating that Xavi was leaving and all this stuff, and I did not know reality from fiction, but that's where I was at. So to help me to see how long my voice holds out and to do a lot of the heavy lifting here, I have brought back on 1/3 of another one of the best Barcelona-centric podcasts. That is Siempre Positivo, and some website called ESPN, if you ever heard it. It's Sam Marsden. And Sam, I wish I had a better reason for you to come back on the show, but this is a pretty important reason, and there was no way I was getting through the show by myself.
Yeah, it's a pretty extreme reaction, Dan, to Barca's performance against Villarreal on Saturday. But to switch it up, Frank Lampard seriously style. Hope you get better soon. It's not nice being ill, is it, and being confined to home and missing that fresh air. But yeah, I think it is a sad podcast in it, because at the end of the day, Xavi is a club legend, and like he says, we tend to. I don't think it's just Barca. I think it's a thing in life, and we do tend to value things more when they're gone, or as he said on Friday, perhaps as a clue when they're starting to go.
Well, yeah, I think for longtime listeners of my show, you know that over the years, Villarreal is this weird. I don't do this on purpose, but it's like always a game that I'm traveling for. It was Villarreal like the second week of my honeymoon, and so like I couldn't do the episode there. I was in Germany when it was with the 4-0 with Frankie De Jong and Gavi and Pedri starting in the midfield for the first time. And now again, for Villarreal, this one, I was like, I just hope Barcelona win like 3-1 or 3-0, and I could just do a 5 headlines the next day. But no, of course, Villarreal seems like always something is happening. So, all right, Sam, if anybody for the last few days is somehow listening to this show and has been living under a rock, or maybe lying in a bed with 102 fever, what has gone down at Football Club Barcelona in the last 3 days, other than conceding 5 at home for the first time in more than 60 years?
Yeah, I guess it's important, and everyone will know the backdrop. It's important to remember the last 2 months, I guess, going back to. I mean, you can probably pinpoint it. Some people may pinpoint it before, but if you go to the Girona game and look at those last 12 competitive games, at least since then, conceding 4 against Girona. Mm-hmm. The Almeria game, when they still conceded 2 and needed a late goal to beat the bottom team, and then the results since, even winning this year, they've conceded 2 goals against Barbastro, they conceded 2 against Real Betis, they've conceded just so many goals. They conceded 4 against Madrid, 4 against Athletic, so it's important, I guess, to have that backdrop. This Villarreal defeat, while it was different to all of them, it was much more chaotic. It was much more. I don't really know what the word would be, but it was much different in the fact that there were 2 comebacks, Barca's and Villarreal's, and it was just, by the end, it was almost just sort of a slapstick comedy show in that added time, the way it sort of finished. And yeah, when the final whistle went, the 5-3, there was kind of a feeling that something. I mean, it's easy to say now, but at the time we were thinking it as well, that something was going to happen, that this wouldn't be sustainable now. At the time, Barca were 10 points behind Real Madrid. The next day, they fell 11 behind Girona. Pretty quickly down in the press conference, you get a feel for when something's going on, because these things happen quite quickly in general on La Liga games, not so much in Champions League games. The away manager's pretty much in and out. And then the first team, or the home team manager, doesn't take too long. But we were waiting, and it got to like an hour and 20, and it was really unusual. You knew something was up. At the same time, people are saying, there's meetings taking place behind the scenes or whether it's Xavi with the board, whether it's the board talking about Xavi. And then Xavi stepped in with his wife, with his brother, and you knew. Well, my first thought was he's gonna resign now. And obviously, what he said was, "I've decided to step down at the end of the season, in perhaps the last sort of ditch attempt to save this season, not his reputation, because I'm sure we'll look back. Well, there will be a time to look back on what he's achieved. If he'd have gone now, it would have been a different conversation. But to give him a chance to go out on a high, I guess, as opposed to going out after a 5-3 loss at home to Villarreal."
Well, the Spanish football podcast with Sid Lowe and Phil Kismilides, they brought up a question that I also wanted to answer here because I might take a slightly different approach to the answer. And I want to start with your answer actually to this question. Why now? And to your point, because you're sitting in that press conference, and I've been in pressers. I think the latest I've ever waited for any manager of any kind was, or coach, I should say, was 35, 40 minutes. And even that's because coaches just hate talking to people is generally what it is for me. And that's what I usually think is going to be the case. The managers, and again, this is my level, so much lower level than sitting at most week and waiting for Xavi. But it's usually just that the managers are taking their good old time and they're being difficult or whatever. But, as you're sitting there, and I think I would have the same approach that once it hits about 45 minutes, like, that something is going to happen because something is happening behind the scenes and eventually he will be there. But that's what I was thinking too when I first saw this, that to your point, why isn't coming at the end of the season? Why does Xavi do it in this way as opposed to saying, all right, it's actually time for me to leave now? Because the thing he said was that the club needed a change of direction. That was the real words he used, the cambio, like that with that change of direction. Why does he feel like it's still him to guide the ship until the end of the season, but then that change of direction, wasn't right to happen just now, but it has to happen then?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's hard to know because when these events happen at Barcelona, what tends to happen is you're getting told all different things from all different corners, and it's a little bit like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. Obviously, what Xavi is sort of what's coming from the Xavi camp is that this was a decision he took after the Supercopa. He said it was something he decided a few days ago. When he said that, I presumed perhaps after the Copa del Rey game, but the briefing is that it was after the Supercopa and that was something he was going to announce later in the season. But it had to come out now because of the drama and the headlines which would have followed the Villarreal. I can believe that Xavi was leaning that way if he'd seen the way he was saying things, and I think it's his way of taking control of the situation. Like you say, would it have been better to go now? It's a difficult question to answer. I don't think it would, but not necessarily because it's not for the best, just because of the financial situation. Joan Laporte has been very clear with journalists and whatnot in on the record and off the record briefings that if Xavi were to go, Rafa Marquez would come in on an interim basis until the end of the season. So I don't think that's something that is perhaps massively appealing in terms of a change of direction or this change of course that Barca need. What Xavi thinks is best for the club, I think he does still think that he has a large part of the club, the players behind him, not the club. The club and the players are obviously very different. I think he thinks that this can be an incentive or a galvanizing factor for the squad. I mean, at the end of the day, the players still want to have success. They know there's going to be a change. I've seen a lot of people saying that not knowing who the manager is next season will be a bad thing and that they're down tools. I mean, I can imagine that perhaps does happen later in the season, but while they've still got objectives, while they've still got to win a chance to, if not win the Champions League, but do something important in the Champions League compared to what they've done in recent years, I can't see why the players wouldn't stick with Xavi. And perhaps, the biggest concern is obviously Xavi has not been able to turn things around this season over the last few months. And I guess the factor would be, why would him saying he's leaving now gonna change that?
Yeah, to me, to almost a similar tone. I think the two best answers I've come up with as to why at the end of the season, not now, is that Xavi gets to, as a club legend, as a player who, not say that all managers don't want to try to protect their legacy, but Xavi, because he will forever be FC Barcelona, right? That was his dream job. I think leaving on his own accord and choosing the way that he wants to leave with that kind of time frame. Not to say it's kind of, you can't obviously do a victory lap if you feel like you're also being forced out, but by leaving on your own accord, I think that he does believe that some of his legacy would be left intact. And I think that also by leaving on his own accord in this way, I think it also opens up, because he was renewed 127 days ago, 100, whatever it was, 120, 129 days ago, to 2025. So I think that this, especially the fact that he is 43, how old is he? 43, 44, 45, whatever
44, yeah, it was his birthday on Thursday.
Yeah. So just turned 44. So I think at his age, that leaves the door open for a return someday. Once maybe he's gotten more experience, or you never know where the future is going to take you. So I think by leaving on accord, that he does love the club. And not to go off on a little tangent here, but I was thinking about this, and I know a lot of people said that he probably came too early as a manager, which I think it's true in a way, but I'm also not entirely sold on that, because I felt like he was the right man actually for where the squad was in 2021. And even last season, he made sense to me as a manager, the ideas that he was putting forward, and the progress the team made. He took a team from ninth to second in 2021-22, and then last season did win 2 trophies, including La Liga by 10 points. But then this season, he did feel like the inexperienced coach that people were afraid of, now going back 2.5 years ago, which is a lifetime in football. And so now 2.5 years, coupled to, what was he, 3 years in Qatar, now he's got almost 5 to 6 years of, first team managerial football under his belt. And yeah, the second part of that then, and to that point about this season, is that he still does have a lot to manage for. And I think he is still actually managing for part of his legacy, to your point about the Champions League, because Barcelona not only is still alive in the Champions League, as crazy as that seems, and it does feel impossible, like just the language that everyone's using, other than Xavi, who did say, I'm going to be leaving even if we win the Liga and the Champions League. So, again, you wouldn't expect a manager to close all doors with his language. But, if he can still get Barcelona far enough in the Champions League that they snag that Club World Cup spot, and I know it seems like such a modicum of importance to Barcelona, but getting that Club World Cup spot from Atleti, I think would matter for next season and their coach and their project, which is based on a point system across different competitions. Don't have time to talk about here. Google that about the Club World Cup spots. And then due to Real Madrid and Girona already being knocked out of the Copa del Rey, that means that Spanish Super Cup spot that I think Kool-Aids feel like is always Barcelona's, that may not be theirs next season.
Yeah, they obviously need a top 2 finish probably if you look at the Copa del Rey draw. So yeah, they need to finish top 4 for Champions League qualification, top 2 for Super Copa, and then like you say, I think their Champions League progress and a place in the Club World Cup is also dependent on how Atletico do, isn't it? Unless they go and win the Champions League and stranger things have happened, you're always cast back to Roberto Di Matteo's Chelsea, little fairy tale runs like that. So you can never say never in a knockout competition. Just to go back to sort of Xavi, and like you say, that initial process, I actually think, that I guess there was almost a freedom when you go to that January transfer window when Aubameyang and Alves and Ferran Torres came in, up until the 4-0 win against Real Madrid. That was probably, in hindsight, the most fun watching Xavi's Barca, and there was a feeling that they were starting to play well, that there was something to be built. The second season was obviously methodical, solid, and I think since then Xavi's kind of been wrestling with his ideas, which I believe are the same as Barca's ideas, and the reality that perhaps being more solid. And he's obviously gone away from that this year. I think because they won the league last year, because they won the Supercopa, he felt like there had to be an evolution. When perhaps, we'll never know, and it's easy to say now, perhaps if they'd have perhaps stuck a little bit more to the way they got success last season. Obviously, look, there are massive nuances. They've not properly replaced Busquets. Since December, they've been without Marc-André ter Stegen. They've not had Gavi. So there are loads of little intricacies in there as well, which have obviously affected that. But I do feel like Xavi has been wrestling the expectations that he thinks there are on playing, and perhaps what he thinks would be the best way for Barca to play. And just the final thing on him staying, I think there is perhaps also, I think it would be naive not to think that all top sportsmen, top coaches, there's an element of ego or selfism in there. And even from like a fan point of view, listeners may know I'm a Burnley fan. I can watch Burnley 2-0 down, play rubbish for 80 minutes against, I don't know, it could be anyone. It could be Liverpool. And in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, get a goal here and you never know. There's half a chance you nick something in extra time. So I think that optimism and that positivity that Xavi has, combined with the sort of what he has done as a player, what he has won, what he has achieved in the game, makes him think that if he makes this announcement, why can't he go out and win the Champions League? Probably not win. They sound like such unrealistic expectations at the moment, but in the back of his mind, I'm sure he's thinking, Real Madrid's next 3 games, they're away at Getafe, then they've got Atletico and Girona. Teams are going to drop points. Barca have got a favourable fixture list now if they win 4 out of 4 before Napoli. Who knows how the pitch is looking in March? So I'm sure in the back of his mind, he probably might not say it this way. There's sort of that element of ego involved as well in staying until the end of the season.
Well, this Barcelona team does score late goals, and there has been, since Xavi arrived, a belief in him that just you felt it didn't exist with Koeman and with Setien and with late stage Valverde about coming back. It wasn't the case in the 70th minute, 75th minute. But I think, not to be a downer, but Xavi's biggest objective now throughout the rest of the season is to finish top 4. Athletic Club drew Cadiz 0-0 yesterday, so Barca and Atleti still are 2 points clear of Athletic Club, and they've both played one less game, but Athletic Club are still in the Copa, and they'll have to even it out shortly. But Athletic Club and Ernesto Valverde know exactly who they are. The identity is solidified. They know exactly who the personnel is. And of course, they're an injury or 2 away from also being in trouble. But top 4 is not guaranteed. to Atletico Madrid or to Barcelona. So they're going to have to go out and earn it. And who knows? Real Sociedad might get in hot form. You never know what's going to happen throughout the rest of the remainder of the Liga season. So kind of a similar question here for you, but I think the pressure now to kind of divide what this means, because he didn't even tell the players before you heard it. So you knew, then maybe the players might have heard it from you or from other journalists, or they obviously would have seen the press for themselves. But every day, and I totally understand why you would announce it now, because not only after the Villarreal match, but going in, it's become, I think, for everybody, exhausting. I mean, it's the same. You and I know the same thing very much, that our mentions and our threads, whatever it is, our comments on videos, on podcasts, Xavi out is just, as every manager is. Koeman out, Valverde out. We've been doing this a while. That it's exhausting, it's draining, and whatever it feels for us to receive tons of messages about whatever manager, time for them to leave, regardless of what we think personally, it's tenfold to 100 times that on the man that it's about, right? And he's hearing that from people who have much more credibility than Barca fan 888-999-9888 on social media or whatever, right? But with the players and Xavi having every match to seem like they were fighting for his job, and I think now that pressure, as you said, is finally gone, which of those parties, either Xavi or the players, do you think this announcement is going to help more throughout the remainder of the season?
I think it helps Xavi probably more than the players. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if the players, I mean, what's the reaction going to be now if all of a sudden Barca start playing really well? Are we going to be, well, the players were the ones to blame all along. They weren't playing very well, and now all of a sudden they are. And if they don't start playing well, then I guess the outcome is, I'd probably be surprised if Xavi lasts the season, if top four's in jeopardy, if they lose to Napoli or whatnot, and they'd have to shake things up. I think it's more of a liberation for Xavi than the players. It's obviously a distraction for players, but I think the players are better at isolating themselves. Xavi is so Barca, he's so involved in the club that he's struggled to distance himself from the radio, from the newspapers, from the reports, from everything, and step away from it. Whereas I think the players in general, the majority of them are quite sort of good at that. They're away from it every now and again. I mean, they do far less media than Xavi. They'll maybe. The average player does media once every 3 games, 4 games, depending who the player is, some more than others. And occasionally they'll get asked a question about Xavi at the end of 3 or 4 questions and say, look, no, we support him, etc. I think that's when it's the most sort of pressure, when you're being questioned about it. I think internally it's not. So I think this decision, even though Xavi said it's, reduces the tension for the players, which I do agree with, I think it's more of a liberation for him, at least in the sort of the next few weeks, as it's been sort of diverts the attention away from any debate or arguments about whether he should stay on.
Well, talking about that, Entorno, for a second here, Xavi knew more than anyone else coming in the pressure of the Barcelona job. Since Johan Cruyff, when he was manager from 88 to 96, no manager has stayed at Barcelona for more than 5 years. The longest tenured was Frank Rijkaard for 5 years, and then it was Guardiola for 4, Luis Enrique and Louis van Gaal for 3 years, and then Valverde and Xavi for 2.5. And that's how quickly that managers come and go at Barcelona. But do you think that for Xavi, after all his time as a player and having felt, I always date back to it, that Iniesta, Xavi, I think when we go back to the revisionist history stuff, and Graham Hunter always has good stuff on this, that Messi wasn't truly, even if he was leaving on loan, the future of Messi was always at Barcelona. I mean, that's how mercurial of a talent he was. But both Xavi and Iniesta, they were so close. I mean, this close to those loans, and who knows if they were ever going to come back from those loans. And Xavi, that loan, I believe, was right after he was recovering from that long injury as well, which he felt like the fans did not support him in. So Xavi, even as a young player, was ready to leave. But then, of course, he becomes one of the greatest midfielders of all time and all that. But you felt like as a player, he fully understood the Entorno. You heard the way he spoke about Barcelona in returning, that he understood the Entorno. But after Jordi Cruyff left, in comes Deco. And it seems to me that the underlying truth that Xavi was also never Laporta's first choice. Do you think that at the end of it all, that noise was still, the Entorno was still a surprise to Xavi after all of that? Like, for a man that seemed fully, completely prepared for the noise and pressure of the Entorno, still after it all was surprised at the noise and pressure of the Entorno?
I think yes, surprise. I wouldn't say complete surprise, but an element of surprise. I think there is knowing about it and experiencing it, which are different things. Obviously, he did experience it as a young player, but I think that's different to experiencing it as the coach. Also, we kind of have, I mean, I guess not everyone is the same, but we kind of have selective memories and tend to remember the more positive things. Xavi certainly sort of preaches that he's very positive and remembers the positive things. So perhaps, we're talking sort of 20 years ago now, aren't we? Sort of 2003, 2004 at the time when he was touted to leave, not coming into the team before Rijkaard come in and before the Guardiola years. So perhaps he doesn't have a full memory of, I mean, I can't remember how bad it was for him at the time, but perhaps he doesn't, I mean, and it probably would have been completely different to being coach. So perhaps it was a completely different experience. So I think it's just a case of different experience when you're in the hot seat. But also, I mean, he loves Barca. He played for Barca. Everyone told him he was going to be the Barca coach, that he was, the next best thing to coach Barca. He turned it down twice. There was probably an element of waiting for the right time. He decided it was the right time. He knew what was to come. Has he been surprised since? Yes, I think probably a little bit. But it is what it is, to quote a famous Barca saying these days.
Well, let me ask you, and it's totally fair. Very much like myself, you weren't necessarily around 20 years ago on this beat, but do you feel like even when he was a player again, as a young player 20 years ago, do you feel like at least in the media or the Catalan, not necessarily the board or Laporta, but the people around the club, when we say Entorno, right, we're talking about the press, we're talking about the men in suits who both are with Barcelona, but also have some kind of role in high Catalan society. Do you feel like the Entorno of Barcelona is still kind of being almost puppeteered by an older generation, or do you feel like the Entorno of Barcelona, and maybe Laporta just returning to the fold is part of this, but do you think the Entorno, it just continues to kind of be this machine that crunches down these managers, whether we're talking about Nunez and Cruyff in 1990, or we're talking about Xavi in 2024, or we're talking about Guardiola in 2012 or 2011? Do you feel like it's an older generation still, or do you think it is merely just the environment, which is what Entorno is, but the environment just continues to be sustained the same way, regardless of who the journalists or outlets are?
I think in general, it's just the environment. I mean, it is just so intense. Even when things are going well, as we saw with Guardiola, it just wore him down. The fact there's constantly stuff going on, there's constantly agendas. Just in Xavi's time, for example, there's been all the Negreira stuff, the Real Madrid stuff over the last couple of weeks. It's just constant. It is. You can see why it's exhausting. It's exhausting to cover it. You get up and you think there's nothing going on, and then all of a sudden they find something that is going on. I think there's just no control to Barca to the same level. And I try not to reference Real Madrid as a comparison, but you kind of have to when you see how sort of, for good reasons or wrong reasons, Florentino Perez kind of keeps that ship in slightly better order. The problem that Barca have is the infighting, and that infighting has carried on beyond just generations. I think the main culprits probably are still, as you say, the remnants of the older generations and the fighting, and the hope is that can sort of disappear as we sort of progress through the years now. But I think also in general it is just the way the club is at the moment. There is an air of toxicity always, isn't there?
Well, I do feel like, Sam, to your point, I think for us to create content and talk about this stuff and writing and speaking about this kind of stuff is interesting, because I do compare the headlines and the topics that your podcast and my show, the things that I talk about, or the things that I have to fit in, the news I have to jam in, and I'll compare it to the Real Madrid shows, right? I do keep one eye on the content that Real Madrid shows, and English speaking, I mean, that are producing. And it's so funny because I think for the content that you guys make and that I make, I feel like we have a hard time, even to the point about Negrera and about all that stuff. We have a hard time jamming it all in. Where for Real Madrid, I'll look at the titles and the headlines and the talking points, and I'm like, there's so much more viewed on, oh, what is Fede Valverde's role this season, or what is, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like the depths of how far down they get to go in detail is much easier, because they're not just. It seems like with us, we're constantly playing dodgeball and just batting off this topic and this topic and this topic. And even at the end of this show, I can say it now, but we don't have any time in this show to get to Lucas Bergvall possibly already being over the line for the summertime by next week. Alejandro Balde prioritizing his long-term future with surgery and missing the rest of the season. And then Balde's absence and what that could have meant for an FFP exception for Barca, like Gabi Adida Roque for Barca, to bring in a midfielder who, at this point, because you haven't said any names, I haven't seen any other names. So I figured when Laporta said Edgar Davids, he actually meant 50-year-old Edgar Davids because I haven't seen any other names. But so we can, that news, we're not even going to really talk about or break down at all because at this point in the show, Sam, people obviously want to talk about the early who's next candidates more than anything else. But I think we are ways away from that. And well, obviously we are. We're still 6 months away. Xavi is in charge till June 30th. But also the men available, and more importantly, I think the men who are currently not available who might be on January 29th, that will all change by June 30th. But in truth, you really want the new man coming in that day so we can hit the ground running as preseason kicks off, and usually that following week. So you would want your new man to come in, at least be in the office, talking to Laporta, talking to Deco, talking to the board by the second week of June, the first week of June, and have that wrapped up by the end of June, signing that contract on July 1st, and the preseason kicking off the next week.
Oh yeah, definitely by June. I was thinking maybe before. I think obviously it depends on how the season pans out. You don't want it to become a massive distraction if Barca are still competing on various fronts or have important objectives. But I think by sort of end of April, May time, it would help if the club know, and the planning doesn't happen for the summer in June and July. It happens between now and the summer. Although how much the coach will have in the planning is obviously another issue altogether when you see the structure at Barca. But yeah, I think they want someone. Yeah, before June, they want a name in place, someone who's going to take over. And I think they will. I don't think it's going to take them. Look, I don't think it's going to be anything immediate, especially in terms of an announcement. But I think by the time we get to April, May time, if not before, depending on if Barca is still in the Champions League, what's going on in La Liga, we'll have a pretty clear idea who the next Barca coach will be, even if it's not official.
All right, Sam, I'm going to put you on the spot. Unfortunately, you're a professional, you're a podcast host, you're a great writer, and I know you can handle this. We're going to do 0 to 10, 10 being most likely, 0 being not likely at all. And I'm going to say a name of all of these candidates, and you give me a general, you could even say 4 to 6. Or if you don't want to do it, you could say pass, and then I'll take the burden and then see how it goes.
But this is just based on the level of realism that I think could happen. Not what I would love to see, for example.
Correct. Because I have my own, right. Because I don't think that is the world that, unfortunately, Barcelona is going to be operating in because of the managers that they're even still paying. I mean, remember, even last season, they were still in court over Quique Setién. I'm not sure if that's even all fully done and dusted. But, okay, so the first name that I think that we saw, I'm not sure how, maybe Tony even was on top of this one, but Real Sociedad's manager, Imanol Alguacil.
That's like I would say like a 3 or a 4. I think people probably do like him, but I don't. Doesn't feel like a Laporta appointment at this moment. I wouldn't. Yeah, a 3 or a 4, 5 at the highest.
I felt like I said a similar number because if Martin Zubimendi isn't forcing his way out, why would his manager, who brought up all those players, also be forcing his way? I think Real Sociedad, they truly believe in their project, and it's a lot harder to pull them away than it was back when when Piquero and that whole crop for Cruyff was pulled away from Real Sociedad. That Real Sociedad is different than this Real Sociedad.
Yeah.
Okay,
and as you said with the Setién thing, Imanol is obviously one of the coaches who's going to come up on this list who has a contract. So when a coach has a contract, it involves a payout, which obviously makes it already more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which I think this next guy falls on this list too. De Zerbi from Brighton.
Probably have him at a similar level. Maybe, similar level to 4. I don't see it, but I wouldn't completely rule it out. I think, look how much Chelsea had to play to get Potter out of Brighton as well. So on that basis, I'd say really, really low. But going to a club that's not in the Premier League to Barcelona is a different sort of thing for Brighton to negotiate than to losing someone to a Premier League rival. It's obviously, Barca is obviously seen as, a one-off opportunity. So there will be some sort of leniency there in that sense with Brighton while remaining business savvy. But I'm not convinced again that he would be one of the initial top targets. But I also don't have a clue who's saying that, who the initial top targets would be.
Well, that's interesting because I actually went the opposite logic with the Premier League idea because my thinking was an Italian manager. We just talked about the Catalan Entorno. So an Italian manager in the Premier League coming to Barcelona instead of staying in the Premier League just historically isn't that's not what happens. Like the Italian manager is taken for big money either to go to Italy or return to Italy, if you will, or to stay in the Premier League. All right, the next one. We knew that Laporta, when he took over, that German managers, we never heard names, but the idea of German managers was thrown at us. So the next two I'll put in tandem, and you can give individual numbers you want, but I think it's a similar number. Hansi Flick, who's currently out of contract, and Julian Nagelsmann, who I believe his contract ends over the summertime or after the Euros, whatever it is.
After the Euros, yeah. I mean, I'll give Hansi Flick. I don't actually. I'm not convinced he will be the next Barcelona manager. But out of the options, I kind of feel like I should give him the highest mark at the moment because he's available.
Yeah,
Because Laporta phoned him up previously in the election campaign to see about his plans and is known to like him. I guess the doubt comes from the lack of success he had with Germany after what he did with Bayern. Otherwise, if he'd done well with Germany and gone out on a high, perhaps I'd be putting this slightly higher. But I'd maybe have him around, sort of 6.5 at the moment. And I probably won't put many people much higher than that, if anyone. But at the same time, even though that's me saying he's the favourite at the moment, I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, well, pretty much after this point now, and I put Nagelsmann much lower than that. I put him at like a 2 even for Nagelsmann. I just think that's going to be thrown out by next week. All right, so these next candidates, I think you've already said you're 6.5, and to that point, I think everybody else is a 3 or less. So Thiago Motta, I mean, he himself has already said. I mean, but yeah, exactly right. So now you want to flirt with a 5 there with
Thiago Motta is an interesting one. Yeah, I've got no real knowledge of how his Bologna side play apart from what I've sort of looked at the last couple of days. It's just an interesting one because of how the club works. Look, him and Deco are from the same place in Brazil. They played for Barca together. They're good friends. It would be a low cost option. I don't know how it would translate. He's obviously played for Barca. It can be sold that way. I know that in the polls in Sport and Mundo Deportivo, he's not featuring highly among the fans. But I just think because of all those things and because we know how Barca work and because of the perhaps financial difficulties they have finding a coach, I just wouldn't completely rule him out. So yeah, I'd probably have him around sort of 4.5.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Diego Motta is I remember when he took in 2018, he took the U19 PSG job where he had played as a player. And I remember a bunch of articles, but maybe it's just getting as a former player, but I remember a bunch was written about how very much like Xavi Alonso when he took over Real Sociedad, their U19s, that he was being very, very not even progressive, but I mean new ideas with the goalkeeper, with the formations. But then once he moved to Girona, failed at Girona in a way, and then he moves to Spezia in 2021, and that again it goes well enough that he moves to Bologna, but it's just like since that time, since he was playing with the U19s, he hasn't really set the world on fire and been on the same trajectory that Xabi Alonso is on. And I think if that was the same case, well, obviously Bayer Leverkusen and Xabi Alonso are a different story, but even if it was a similar trajectory, I think we're having a different conversation here. All right, Klopp, I mean, I put this one at a 1. Is this a 0.5? Well, I mean,
yeah, but I mean, I put it as a 1 because of Klopp, not because of Barca. I think Barca would go out of their way to appoint him, but I find it very hard to believe Klopp would leave Liverpool and go straight into a job having walked out of his contract at Liverpool. I feel like that would create all sorts of problems, and I think he does genuinely want a break.
I mean, well, we just talked about all the Barcelona managers that have said, I'm burned out for this, even though I love this club and I'm Catalan. And then to have Klopp say, I'm too tired for Liverpool to jump into. I mean, I was talking with a friend about this. I mean, to your view, is Manchester United and Barcelona the most, we'll say, hornet's nest of a environment? I mean, I think those are the two. As far as the pressure of a manager, how exhausting being a manager is. I feel like Man United and Barca are 1 and 2 in the world.
I think that Barca is on another level to Manchester United, but they probably are the top 2. I mean, you can put Madrid in there as well when things go wrong.
Yeah.
I just think in Spain, especially, and in Barcelona, the media scrutiny and the amount of local media outlets and journalists is on another level to in England, where there's a more sort of national reporting than opposed to local reporting.
True. Yeah. Okay. Thomas Tuchel. And even though he's in charge of Bayern Munich, just weird comments was it 2 days ago or yesterday about Spain and about how he loves working with Spaniards and stuff like that. So I mean, maybe his comments make this a 5, but before that, I would have said like a 2. But then he says that weird thing. So
Yeah, yeah. Bayern have released a statement about that, saying that it's been basically been twisted. It was like a school's event, and he spoke about all different things, and there were Spanish kids there, and they were like, "Do you want to come? Would you like Spanish people? Do you want to come and coach in Spain?" And he made these, so it wasn't as sort of. I made the mistake as well, and I spoke on the podcast. I've only seen the Bayern statement since I said about him saying that. But yeah, apparently there was slightly some context to it. But even before these comments, I have seen and read lots of stuff from people who cover Bayern who say like, Tuchel's future is not guaranteed beyond this season. The relationship between him and Bayern isn't the best. I guess the problem is he has a contract with Bayern. I don't know until when. So if Bayern know Barca are sort of headhunting him or trying to tap him up, then perhaps that would come into it in terms of how they want money. If he was to be sacked by Bayern before the end of the season, then I think he would be very much sort of up there with the Hansi Flick numbers, if not higher. But because he's got that contract, because he's Bayern, future isn't certain for now. I'll put him around sort of 4, an interesting outsider, but it's conditional of what he does this season.
yeah, and I also think that it's interesting that in every generation of managers, you have those ones who you're like, oh, if you were to retire that manager as a representative of a club, and for Thomas Tuchel, it's so interesting because he's done Chelsea and PSG and Bayern Munich, but he really has been just a top level, basically manager for hire, right? Like he's almost mercenary who's not connected to any specific club for any amount of time, but he's been at all the big stops, and so I think I open the idea that if Bayern Munich and if they don't win the Liga, sorry, Bundesliga, right? Because it seems like they're not on pace to, and if they don't win that, then that makes Tuchel special in a way that he doesn't want to be at Bayern Munich. Next one, and kind of to the point of whoever you said it was, Agusil or Desarbi, Michel for Girona. I think the Barcelona version, I can almost give this an 8, but on the Michel and the City Group version of this, I'd say it's almost a 2 or a 3.
It's a weird one because I don't quite understand why, but there seems to be an undercurrent of that. It just doesn't interest either party. That Michel is not massively sort of flirting or encouraging Barca's interest, and that Barca also don't see Michel as a fit. I mean, I guess, look, so far, what's he done? He's taken Rayo Vallecano and Huesca up to the Liga, but was then sacked. He's done an amazing job with Girona last season. They came 10th. This season, how they play is incredible. I love watching Girona. This isn't me. This isn't my opinion, but I guess from Barca's opinion, are they perhaps thinking, well, these things can happen one season. It would be a risk to appoint him. I don't know. The way his Girona side plays has elements, I would say. It's not completely a Barca style, but it has elements of what I would have liked to have seen Xavi do in terms of inventiveness at times. I mean, the peak perhaps being, the use of Miguel Gutierrez in that game against Barca back in December at Montjuic, little things like that. The way he sort of uses Eric and Arnau Martinez and Jan Couto on the right, the way he sort of sets his teams up has been really good. I think he'd be an interesting option, but yeah, I don't see it happen. I'd give it probably like a 2.
All right, the next guy, it's either a 0 or a 10. There's no in between. Jose Mourinho.
Oh, it's a 0. I mean, I hope it's a 0. You see, he came into Barcelona last week. That was like peak Jose Mourinho. Jorge Mendes sort of fluffing stuff around. Or get a story out there of Jose Mourinho being in Barcelona. Surely not. If that's not a 0, I don't know what I'll do. I don't want to say anything.
Yeah. No, it'll be like, you and I are in trouble. Jose Mourinho, there's one manager for Barcelona that can even come after us. Like that, it's Jose Mourinho. He knows enough English. So then last one here, and this is the one I tweeted about, that if I had a pick, it'd be this guy. It'd be Garcia Pimienta. I said if I was the president of Barcelona, he would be my 9. But because in 2021 he was let go for Sergi Barjuan from Laporta, and he's built Las Palmas into what they are. But with relationships being the way they are, and we just talked about that pressure, I can't imagine. And people argued with me about this, that if Barcelona comes calling, basically a lifelong, because that's what he was before Las Palmas, a lifelong Barcelona guy, dating all the way back to, what was he? He was one of the younger managers on that 1987 Cadet A team with Messi and Piqué and Fabregas. So for him to basically be a lifelong Barcelona manager, for him to be let go in 2021, but when they come calling, is that enough to come back? But it just feels like he will be there, very much like Xavi. I feel like Garcia Pimienta will return someday, but not with Laporte in charge. So, like, again, I put that very high in the future, but I just, like, for now, I mean, I must put it like a 3 because of the fact that if he returns to Barcelona and takes over that job with Laporte as the president, it must feel like he already has half of a foot already back out the door. Because the minute something goes wrong by October, November next season, he knows that he was dead man walking the first time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Rick actually said on the podcast today that I don't think he said that Garcia Pimienta would definitely be his number one pick, but he said that the more he thinks about it, the more he feels like it's perhaps like you say, the best option out of all the names that have come up.
Rick's a smart guy. I mean, that's why. I mean, Rick's a smart guy. He knows. He's been on the show too. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I just think that because of the manner of his dismissal from Laporta, I just think there's too many cracks there. I don't think he's strong enough to sort of, the first signs of cracks or problems to sort of manage things with the board or with the media, perhaps if things don't go brilliantly from the start, and he's easily dispensable. It doesn't feel, as much as I would like that to be a possible appointment and to work, I feel like it comes with a lot of risks, and I think Laporta is probably looking for someone who can be a little bit stronger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the big point here is that and I think the argument that you and I both know in covering this team, that Barcelona, the draw of Barcelona being the manager of Barcelona, like, we've gone through these managers and we haven't even figured out one that we were felt comfortable, saying makes sense to us at this point, let alone what actually makes sense for the club. And I think the two camps is that I think I've heard a lot of, especially here in the U.S., like pundits or people who aren't really fully comfortable with La Liga or Spain or whatever. They've just said that, who would want that job now? Think of it almost like an American job. But Barcelona is a huge job. And I think any manager worth their salt, including Jose Mourinho, would think, I can fix it. I can be the difference.
Definitely Jose Mourinho.
Well, of course. But I'm saying is even Tuchel, Michel, De Zerbi, I think any of those managers, Flick, anybody's going to come into Barcelona and say, this is a huge job. This is a legacy-defining job. And I can fix this. I mean, I know, like, the people on the dating app say it's always that, like, I can fix him or I can fix her. And I think any manager who believes in himself is going to say that if I was the change, I can be, Xavi said change of direction. I think any manager is going to say, I can be the difference. But as much as I think the manager matters, the last question I have for you, Sam, I think is the biggest one, maybe for the future of the club. How important is it for Laporte and Deco to get this next manager right for the sake of their futures? Or is is Laporte's future tied solely, you think, to the club's finances and the stadium project? Like, are we underwhelming how important that is for the socios to what, how the club's finances and the stadium project are going to turn out? No, it's winning, right? Let's just be logical and real about it, right? It's about the winning.
Yeah, I mean, if the stadium is a massive screw up and if finances get worse and worse, then yeah, it can have an effect. But it all comes down to what happens on the pitch, basically. So yeah, this next appointment is it's huge for Laporta and Deco. And if it goes wrong, if by October, November, December, Barca are struggling in the Champions League, out of the title race, and you're talking about sacking another coach, all of a sudden the spotlight falls straight away on Joan Laporta, because what it would be his. I mean, I guess Koeman wasn't his coach, but it'd be a third coach, and so it's a massive appointment. And I can have qualms about how they're going to make the appointment, the process they will undergo, and perhaps the fact that they lean too much on certain advisors or intermediaries as opposed to perhaps thinking 100% what's best for the club. But I think, I don't envy making this decision, because we've just been through that list, and it's really hard to, hone in on one name and say, yeah, this is the guy that's going to be a perfect fit. I mean, even if, for me, I'll tell you the name. You didn't mention one of the names that Tony mentioned, actually, but for me, when we went through that list and Rick said about Pimienta, I said the dream pick is maybe sort of a bit of an exaggeration, but the one I would like to see, and I've given it a 1, would be Jurgen Klopp, for example. But even if we say that was like he would come, he wouldn't have a sabbatical, even that doesn't feel like it's an instant success. I mean, coaching Barca is very different to coaching Liverpool. He doesn't get the same patience he got at Liverpool. There's the language issue. There's his personality issue, how that chokes with the board or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to pick a Barcelona coach. So I do have some sympathy, and I hope that Laporta and Deco can get it right. Tony's pick, by the way, who was probably not someone who will get the job either, but he said he would go all after Andoni Iraola.
because he's currently at Bournemouth.
Yeah, he's done a good job so far.
You feel like he is affordable. That would be part of, I think, that discussion. But I mean, even Bournemouth might be outside of Barca's price range at the moment. But so instead of doing, thankfully this was more about the news and the future more than it was about an obituary for Xavi's time as a manager. Because again, we're going to be writing that obituary 6 months now, or that eulogy, I guess to say. Not the obituary, but the eulogy for Xavi's managerial time at Barcelona. At least the first time, I put quotes around that. And I do think that Kool-Aids and most fans in sports, I found they do get into the habit of not appreciating people while they're around and only appreciating once they're gone. I mean, we do that in life too, right? Where you don't enjoy the good times until they were the old times or whatever the phrase is. But even recently, Busquets, Alba, I'd say Rakitic, Ernesto Valverde, those are all the recent examples. And I think Xavi honestly will likely be the latest in that camp, depending on what happens next. But I even think that even with 2.5 years, depending again, top at least as long as he finishes top four, the fact that if he does top four and he does he did make it past the group stage for the first time in 3 years. So I do feel like with the 2 trophies and the way he picked up the team to second in 2021, 22, I do feel like we are going to say, all right, we're going to appreciate Xavi more as a manager even after he's gone.
Yeah, I mean, because he's not appreciated at all now, is he? And that's one of the things he said. It's an unpleasant job at times, and you feel like there's a lack of respect. I mean, the cold hard facts, as long as he doesn't, just the club don't disgrace themselves between now and the end of the season, are he saved Barca in his first season in charge. There was the 4-0 Clasico win, which Clasico wins always go down in history. There were some really good performances. They built on that the second season. I think like you say, in 5 years, we probably won't remember that it was, they were winning 1-0 every week. We remember that they won the league by 10 points, that they won the Supercopa. And then it just faded out in the third year. It certainly won't be seen as a catastrophe. And, winning La Liga, Barca's first La Liga in, for 4 years, by the time they won it was obviously a success and achievement. So, he'd be remembered as, I think, a good manager in that moment. I mean, I guess probably how he's judged depends on what comes after as well, a little bit, in terms of, if Barcelona go on to amazing things, then perhaps would be a little bit like, oh, maybe they were underachieving a little bit. If they have problems, it might be a little bit like, I don't know, Manchester United with Solskjaer, when you're right. Solskjaer actually didn't do too bad. Obviously, he didn't win as much, or he didn't win a league or anything, but he came second to City and stuff, and you look back since things have not improved and go, he was actually doing a lot better than we thought, given the state of the club's finances and everything that was going on off the pitch.
Well, the team doesn't have too much time to even lick their wounds on this or to emotionally figure anything out, because they're back at it on Wednesday and they need points. They need points to, again, keep pace on top four. And, crazier things have happened, but, Real Madrid and Girona, now Girona, what'd you say, 12 points now, and Real Madrid 11. So
11 and 10, yeah.
11 and 10. That is a lot of points, and it's already February. So by the time that match happens, and so there's a lot going on. So as exhausting as it is for a Barcelona manager, I know it is triple as difficult to be not only around the club, but to be reporting and to making content around the club, Sam. So I not only appreciate all of your time, but just again, I usually tell people where to find you, but where are the best things and the things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, well, Siempre, Positivo is the podcast with Rick and Tony, and as we've discussed here, there's probably not enough Barcelona English language content out there based on how much stuff is happening and how much stuff you need to listen to understand it all. That's the main place. A legal
podcast. I think I always say this, like we need somebody to supplement ours, because you guys have your stuff, because you guys have the inside sources, and then I have my stuff. That I try to bring on the Peñas, and we try to do a little more community stuff here. And then we need like a legal analyst podcast that just works on the Guerra case and things. Because honestly, I've tried. I can't tell you how many Spanish documents I've tried to translate and understand from Spanish courses. And I'm just like, what's happening? I don't even have a U.S. legal degree. I'm talking to lawyers here in the U.S. and lawyers in Spain. I'm like, what has my life come to? And it's the existential crisis of covering Barcelona. It is what it is.
It's crazy. Yeah, Spanish legal lexicon and injury lexicon is just unnecessarily long.
Right. Even understanding how the terms will, the conditions of the injury will determine the length of the whatever it is. But all right. So you can again follow Sam and follow Siempre Positivo. They're on Spotify, all the other podcasts, as well as there's special podcasts available just on their Patreon at least once a week. So Twitter, then they're also on Twitter, Instagram, all the places you find me. And again, most of my listeners also, there's a lot of overlap again on Patreon. And while you're on Patreon, following them, also follow me on Patreon as well. Close Facebook group for me. And then again, a good rating for both of us on the podcast apps, subscribing to my YouTube channel. That's all the ways to help everybody out. And as always, until next time, Sports Bar.